form is very fascinating, what power we have as individuals. But I wasn't aligned to heal yet. I needed to have more experiences, which is why unconsciously my energetic immune system was allowing these experiences, because I signed up for this. I needed to learn something. So many times we often just download it, like in the Matrix, put the chip in the back of the head and just download the whole thing. I want to bypass the learning process. And that's not my experience. I'm just so sorry. You know, when miracles happen, they happen because somebody's already been prepared. And it seems like a miracle, but there was just no need for that experience for that person. And there's grace in that. But in the heavens, there's universal law that they can't, like, we must go consciously through a lot of things. And then there are other things that maybe in our pre-earth life experiences that we didn't need to learn, but we're kind of going through it, and there's this grace drops in and somehow a miracle happens in our eyes. I don't know why that is, but my experience would be is if you've gone through a near-death experience or you've had some awakening, that's divinely orchestrated for your specific. If I know anything, I know that we are specifically in a matrix. We're specifically in a divine blueprint. And so I've stopped questioning that. Like, it's just, if I'm going through something, it's because it's part of something that I need to learn. And I have been saying for some time now that I am co-creating with my higher self that already knows what is required for my evolution, for my highest good. There is a strength inside me and a purpose so strong. I've always felt it. I've always had this knowing, always, from ever and ever, that kept me for this eternal loop. Like, I could just always know. And I knew that I just knew I wasn't done. But in those moments, I saw my children and I saw my husband. And I was like, I am not letting go. So if you could control a near-death experience, that was me. I was so close to the veil for so many years, but I kept myself going. And I was doing enough right that I have enough life force to do that. So in that moment, when I had gone through all the tricks in my bag and there was nothing left but me and this raw, open space that was starting to open around me and engulf me, there came a point where I just, for I don't want to say hours, but for a long time, millisecond by millisecond, I kept myself in my body. And I kept seeing my kids and seeing my husband. And then pretty soon I kind of watched my husband kind of go away, and I saw my kids and they were my anchors, and I'm just holding on to them going like, I'm homeschooling these kids. No way can Shane keep homeschooling them. They've had a sick mom for so long, and now I'm going to die in France. Like, forget it. I just wouldn't do it. I wouldn't let go. And then it was like, as the space around me began to open up more and more, the less I could navigate being anchored. And I was just fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. And then it was like, I didn't have an ounce of energy left. And I remember just literally saying, thy will be done. There is nothing else that I know to do. If it was my job to stay in my body, I failed. Which then goes to these beliefs around why we do what we do, because I knew at the bottom of every decision I made was this fear that I wasn't enough, that I came to the earth, I had a mission to do, and I didn't get it done. And so that's more of my anchor than anything else was like, I was afraid to die. I wasn't afraid of death because I saw through the veil, but I was afraid that I would die not having succeeded at what I came here to do. And when I finally, this would probably be what I would call the biggest and maybe only surrender that I've had in my life. Now, I've learned to surrender since then, but this was the surrender of my willingness to say, nothing else I can do, it's out of my hands. And the moment because it was my agency choosing a lot of this. Now, I'm not saying that you can choose agency in a lot of near deaths, but in my case, I said, okay. And as soon as that happened, it was like it wasn't like I floated out of my body and looked down at my body. It was that this space around me just got bigger and bigger until I was no longer in, like, I just wasn't there. I wasn't in, I didn't feel the presence of my physical body. But I will say that I didn't ever feel, how do I word that? I could always sense my physical body, but I could sense my individuality. And this is where you start getting into a lot of conflicts when people try to describe these spaces, because I was everything, but I was also one thing. I was one and I was all, and I was both at the same time. So I had a sense, not necessarily of my physical body laying down in the plane, but I had this sense that I was an individual having an earth experience still in some capacity. So I just kind of felt myself. I felt my beingness. And then as this space became big around me, and then it became everything around me, it was very familiar to me as the space between the zeros and the ones, is what I usually say. But it was a very, very strong space of infinite unconditional love. And that's, a part of a predominant story, depending on who's telling it. For me, I was every single cell of every cell, every photon, every neutrino that makes me up was the light of Christ. It was the light of God. And when I say Christ, I don't mean Jesus the Christ. I mean the Christ consciousness that is all the planet. And so it doesn't matter what religion somebody is or even lack thereof. It's just a title. It's an energy, as well as, if you're Christian, to be Jesus or Yeshua the Christ as a calling. But it's something, the Christ is something I know to be inside of each of us. It is the light that is our aliveness, and it's who we always are. So when I say that the light is always shining somewhere, the light is always consistent. It is always every fiber of us. And I was able to see that in real time, very clearly. And so the particles that I were, imagine that every single particle is intelligence. Everything is intelligence. And it's assigned in form, it's assigned a job. It's a flower, it's a tree, it's a human, it's a whatever, right? And then life force enters into that. And so there's a lot more to that I won't go in right now, but I had this knowing, this sense that I could choose any one of these particles and spend almost an eternity exploring in there, which is why I feel like a lot of people, like, who've had experiences like me, but maybe also have drug experiences and or very dysfunctional childhoods that have had severe abuse, or like the people I worked with who have been trafficked and rescued, where there's extreme trauma, that they never quite get out of that space. This is a space of grace. And so I would imagine that filled in all of these institutions are people who haven't quite been able to come back into full regulation after these types of experiences. And I'm not joking. I could go down any one of these pathways and spend an entire earth life in there just exploring, and you'd never hear from me again. So that's this space. It's just so incredibly informative, and it's like all of it downloads at once. It's all there. It's in you, Jessica. It's in every one of us at any given moment. It's just that we don't know what to look for. We're not paying attention. We believe when we were born, it was our first separation from our truth. We believe we're separate from this power that created us. So we believe we're separate from kind of even ourselves, and this longing of this inner desire to go home or to be whatever. Like, our spirit and our body sometimes don't quite figure out how to operate in sync, which is why we like energy medicine and different tools. Like, how do I come into alignment with myself? But we also have that same thing with God, and we have that same thing with each other. So because we believe we're separate, we don't tend to look for the things that would give us the solutions that are already built into our design. And I saw that in this experience immediately, just was like, yep, there it is. And so in my near death, I didn't have that overwhelm. I didn't have the physical structure that was getting overwhelmed with the amount of circuitry running through me. And I was like, oh, are you kidding me? I'm like in heaven now. And I loved it. I'm like, I'm home. I knew it wasn't the end all home, but I knew that I was like, this is the space of love. This is the space that I know that feels like, it feels like home. And why, just always, why on planet Earth do we not live in a space of love like this? Like, it's not that, it's like so beautiful. Why would we choose anything else? Forgetting that the veil kind of covers us and we don't remember half the stuff. But anyway, that was the start of it, is just this looking around. I did sense, after I settled into that space engulfing me, I did notice other entities or other like essences in there. I didn't have conversations with them, but it was almost kind of like a hi, hey, you know, like there was a lot of just, I could hear external kind of just communication through my inner hearing. But that's not why I was there. And I had this distinct knowing that I was with a guide, that there someone there that was orchestrating it so much, but it wasn't like there was like, oh, my guide met me. And I was like, that wasn't my experience. My experience was being engulfed, knowing the space, feeling the love, that not enoughness, all of that kind of just dissipated. And then it was like I was being guided. I was just like, this experience was unfolding, and all of a sudden, like I said, there were things going on around me, but then that same experience that put me into the space began to morph into a white light. And it was like I was in a Merkaba, almost like I was in this space, that something surrounded me, and I was in this white universe that was the whitest, brightest, no descriptive word that could tell you how pure and how colorful and how white, like all of the colors of the spectrum within it, but the glowingness of it was white. But it was all knowledge. It was all information, but it was my information, because there's so much out there. What he was doing was they were creating a space that was more contained for what I needed to learn and to know. But within it, I could, it was endless.